And a very warm welcome to Daily Power Parsha. Today is Friday, April 16th, 2021. And we are going to look at the last sections of the Torah portions of Tazria-Metzora, our double Parsha for this week. We always love a double Parsha. It gives us a lot to look at, a lot to explore. So it's certainly a treat when we have the opportunity to study a portion that's doubled together. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. We're going to jump right in without further ado. And 6th reading is right here. Now, this talks about a form of tzarat that is very unique. We've been talking about tzarat and this spiritual malady that that afflicted people's bodies or could afflict even people's clothes. And now today we talk about tzarat on homes, which is next level. All right, here we go. And the Lord, this is Leviticus Chapter 14, verse 33. And the Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, when you come to the land of Canaan, which I am giving you as a possession, and I place a legion of tzarat upon a house in the land of your possession. In other words, you're going to enter the land of Israel. Right now you're in the desert, but you're going to enter Israel, Canaan, Israel, and you're going to get into a house. You're going to move into a home. And I'm going to put a legion of tzarat upon one of the homes in your possession. So let's continue. And the one to whom the house belongs comes and tells the Kohen, saying, something like a legion has appeared to me in the house, right? That's a little bit awkward. It's like, Mr. Cohen or Rabbi Cohen, I need you to come over and take a look at my house. I think I got tzarat on my house. So the Kohen, first things first, check this out. This is powerful. Verse 36. First thing is, before the Kohen looks, the Kohen shall order that they clear out the house before the Kohen comes to look at the legion, so that everything in the house should not become unclean. Are you with me as to why that happens? Because the moment the Kohen looks at it, and if you would deem it to be unclean, in other words, yes, that is tzarat, then at that moment, everything that's inside the house becomes unclean, and then it's a nightmare. So the Kohen says, what you don't know can't hurt you, thus clear out everything from the house, and then I'll take a look at the walls, and if it is tzarat, it doesn't go retroactively onto what was in the house. It would only be what's left in the house, but since you took out everything from the house that has value, so it's good. Does that make sense? All right, basically some preemptive clearing out of the house. Let's continue with verse 37. And after this, the Kohen shall come and to look at the house. So you clear out everything else, and then the Kohen looks at the house. Verse 37, and he shall look at the legion on the house. Now, here's how it goes. If the legion in the walls of the house consists of dark green or dark red, sunken-looking stains, appearing as if deeper than the wall. That's a feature that we had also on the skin. If you recall that the actual area of the lesion looks somehow, deeper than the rest of the skin. So in this case, it's either dark green or dark red, and it's sunken. It looks like it's sunken. It looks like it's deeper than the wall itself. Then what do you do? Then the Kohen shall go out of the house to the entrance of the house, and he shall quarantine the house for 7 days. I love that. How do you quarantine a house? Right? You can quarantine people inside a house and say, don't leave. But how do you quarantine a house? Essentially, what you do is you board up the house and say, don't go in that house for 7 days. The house is off limits. You put police tape around the house. Do not enter. Then the Kohen shall return on the 7th day to look at the house. Now, if the lesion has spread in the walls of the house, right? So if now it's spread, it's active, then verse 40, the Kohen shall order that they remove the stones upon which the lesion is found, and they shall cast them away outside the city to an unclean place. So if they have grown and spread on the stones of the wall of the home, you got to take out those stones and cast them away outside the city to an unclean place. What about the rest of the house? And he shall scrape out the house from the inside all around, and they shall pour out the mortar dust from what they scraped outside the city into an unclean place. So you scrape the house on the inside all around, and whatever the scrapings leave also has to be eliminated from the house and even eliminated outside the residential area to a place of impurity. And they shall take other stones, verse 42, they shall take other stones, in other words, new replacement stones, and bring them instead of those stones. And he shall take other mortar dust and plaster the house. I guess mortar dust would be plaster, cement, whatever it is that you use to keep stones from moving around when you're building a wall of a home. All right, so that's what you do. So the Kohen looks, if it's not an issue, if it's not Sarat, he says you're fine. If it looks like it might be, he quarantines the house for 7 days. If it spreads, you got to remove those stones and scrape the walls and then put new stones back. But verse 44, but if the lesion returns, you took out the stones that had the lesion on it. But what happens if the lesion returns and erupts in the house after he had removed the stones and after the house had been scraped around and after it had been plastered? So you did everything. You took out the bad stones, you scraped, then you removed everything and you replastered it and you put in new stones. And what happens if it still happens again a second time? Then the Kohen shall once again come and look at it. Now, if the lesion in the house has spread a second time, it is a malignant tzarat in the house. It is unclean. So what do? Torah says he shall demolish the house. In other words, at that point, there's no easier fix. The only solution is remove the whole house, demolish it. Demolish the house, its stones, its wood, and all the mortar dust of the house. And he shall take them outside the city to an unclean place. That is where it goes, and it's gone, and it's out. That is, that is it. Let's continue. And anyone entering the house during all the days of its quarantine, going back to what we said before, right? So we just gave the most extreme case where you quarantined it, it spread, you removed some stones, you cleaned it out, you put in new stones, and it still came back a second time and spread a second time, you demolish the house. But what if, going back, rewinding the timeline a little bit to that original quarantine? So remember, the homeowner notices something on the walls, calls the Kohen. Kohen's like, yeah, that looks like it might be a problem. We got to quarantine it for 7 days and see what's happening. Is it getting bigger? Is it getting smaller? Is it disappearing? Okay. So what if during those 7 days of quarantine, somebody walks into the house? Somebody ignores the tape that says do not enter and enters the house. So the Torah says anyone entering the house during all the days of its quarantine shall become unclean, impure until the evening. So it's not a 7-day thing, it's a 1-day thing. And whoever lies down in the house, right? So if you all right, I'm going to sleep in this house, shall immerse his garments. And whoever eats in the house shall immerse his garments. So you become impure, essentially, if you step into the house. All right, fine. So that's all in that worst case scenario. But verse 48, if the Kohen comes again and looks at the lesion. In other words, the Kohen came the first time and then he quarantined it. And then he came again after 7 days. And now he looks at the lesion, and behold, the lesion on the stones did not spread in the house. I'm sorry, this is after the house had been plastered. So this is actually after the initial quarantine and even after the initial removal of stones, right? We're talking about stones were removed and replaced and replastered. And now the lesion did not spread. In other words, it looks like it's done. We killed it. We got rid of it. No more tzarat. So then the Kohen shall pronounce the house clean because the lesion has healed. So what do you do next? All right, ritual process, like we did with the person, we do with the house. To ritually cleanse the house, he shall take 2 birds, a cedar stick, a strip of crimson wool, and hyssop. The same formula, if you recall, a few days ago, I think on Wednesday we read this, the same formula: 2 birds, cedar stick, strip of crimson wool, and hyssop. He shall slaughter 1 bird into an earthenware vessel over spring water. He shall take the cedar stick, the hyssop, the strip of crimson wool, and the live bird, and he shall dip them into the blood of the slaughtered bird into the spring water and sprinkle toward the house 7 times. Sprinkle that toward the house 7 times. And he shall thus cleanse the house with the blood of the bird, the spring water, the live bird, the cedar wood, the hyssop, and the strip of crimson wool. And once again, he shall then send away the live bird outside the city onto the open field. He shall thus effect atonement for the house, and it will be clean. Essentially, the same procedure as is done with human tzarat, as is done with home tzarat. The only difference being the home doesn't have to appear in the temple for the process, right? The home is not the home stays where it is, and the Kohen comes and does the procedure, the ritual there.
Rabbi?
Yeah, Donna.
At the beginning of this verse, at the beginning of the session, it said that a house would be chosen to give Surat. I mean, it sounds like it was put in there on purpose. And why was that one? How was the house chosen?
Good. We're going to get to that soon. That's one of the insights that I wanted to share. So we're going to get there in a minute. Let's wrap up the discussion, because it looks like there's a concluding verse here, and then we're going to get right back to that. But excellent question. Let's just do 3 more verses. So verse 54, all this is the law for every lesion of tzarat, and for a netek, and for tzarat of garments and houses, and for a se'et, and for a sapachat, and for a baheret, different types of tzarat, to render decisions regarding the day of uncleanness and the day of cleanness. This is the law of tzarat. Okay, so these are the laws, very extensively discussed, etc. Now, Donna's asking a very good question. The question is, the Torah says, when you come to the land of Canaan, right, which I'm giving to you, and I place a legion of tzarat upon a house, it sounds like it's almost like a promise, like God is saying this is going to happen. And what does it mean this is going to happen? It should only happen if somebody messes up and acts with impropriety and gossips and whatever. What does it mean that God is saying, I'm going to make it happen? So Rashi has a beautiful commentary. Rashi says that phrase where God almost promises, I will place a legion of tzarat. Look what Rashi says. This is good news for them, that legions of tzarat will come upon them. In other words, God is saying, I'm going to give it to you, and it's good news. Why? Because the Amorites had hidden away treasures of gold inside the walls of their houses during the entire 40 years that the Israelites were in the desert. And through the legion, he will demolish the house and find the hidden treasure, find them. So basically, he says Amorites, the people that lived in Canaan, what would become the land of Israel. So there were people living there, and they had homes, but they knew that the Jews, because everyone knew about the promise to Abraham that their descendants were going to enter the land. So, but they felt confident that when the Jews try to enter, they're going to fight and battle and stop them from coming in. But just in case, they decided to hide their treasure, before going out to war, they decided to hide their treasure in the walls of their home. This is before safes and banks. So hide it in the walls, because everyone looks under the mattress. That's too easy. So they would hide it inside the walls of their home. But because of tzarat, and they had to remove the stones, the Jews ended up finding the treasure. And thus, we have something that we would call in modern parlance a silver lining, a major silver lining. Essentially, from a negative, a treasure is born. From what seems to be a hassle, I got tzarat on my house. I got to call a kohen. I got to quarantine. I can't be in my house for 7 days. Gewalt, now you're telling me I have to take out stones from my house and schlep it outside the city and get new stones and scrape everything. Oh, are you kidding me? What a hassle. But at the end of the day, they would find treasure, which means there's a few lessons here. Number one, we have to be careful into not kvetching too much. Now, to take away all kvetching would be, questioning our Jewishness. But, if it's what needs to be done, it's what needs to be done. And that itself is a treasure. Plus, there could be an additional treasure. Why do I say it's a treasure? There used to be a refrain that some in the older generation said, it's hard to be a Jew. And unfortunately, that created a negative impression in the minds of many of their children that Judaism is fraught with challenge and difficulty and hardship. And thus, to live a happier life might mean to just let go of the old ways. It might be difficult. Judaism is not easy, but it's very rewarding, hence the treasure. So there might be effort involved, there might be difficulty, but at the end of the day, it pays off. There's beautiful things that are born of living a Jewish life. Living a Jewish life, a committed life, a communal life, life of the relationship with God, faith, Torah, mitzvot, etc. We could go on, Shabbos, kosher, all of the wonderful rituals and traditions and symbols and holidays and observances and wisdom. It leads to a very rich and spiritually wealthy life, if not physically as well. So the point of all this is sometimes the things that we look at as a burden are actually the greatest blessing. Like in this case, where God is giving the people, tzara'at in their houses, and it's a pain in the neck, but meanwhile, it leads to treasure. Silver linings, look for the silver linings in the cloud. That's number one. Second message. Tzara'at, we said, I'll stop sharing so I can see everybody in bigger images. Tzara'at, we said in a previous session, in a few previous sessions, one of the reasons for tzara'at, or one of the causes, is gossip, right? Too much chatter, which is why birds are used, because birds symbolize chatter. One bird slaughtered, which symbolizes unhealthy chatter. The second bird released and freed, which represents uplifting chatter. So instead of speaking ill of someone else, speak positively about someone else. Instead of hurting someone with your words, empower someone with your words, etc. So, but tzara'at in all of its forms, one of the causes was due to too much gossip, which begs the question. So you're telling me a person sinned and gossiped and did something wrong, and they're getting rewarded for it? They're getting a treasure? Are you kidding me? And the answer is yes. Because the treasure is found in life in the difficult spots, whether God orchestrated the difficulty or whether we orchestrated the difficulty. Either way, if we're in a challenging spot, we have to know that there is an upside. Sometimes a person might say, yeah, well, if God gave me the challenge, it's one thing, but I brought this on myself. I messed up. So I'm done. I'm lost. It's too late. Take it easy. Slow down, cowboy. Not so bad. It's not so bad. It's not so hopeless. There's hope. There's treasure. In other words, what we tell a person, what we tell ourselves is, where you are today is exactly where you need to be to find the treasure of your life. In other words, don't say, well, I'm only here because I made mistakes. Doesn't matter. How you got to where you are today is irrelevant. You are where you are, and today is the day to find the treasure in your life. That's what's on the agenda for today. Find the treasure, the blessing, the breakthrough, the connection, whatever that treasure means for you in your life at this point. But no matter how you got there, it's all about discovering the blessing. God works through our actions as well. We can't derail the divine plan. We can only bring it about in sometimes interesting ways. But where we are is by divine providence, even if we made a choice. So thus, there is a treasure to be found. Hope that makes sense. All right, let's get back. Yes, makes sense? Ish? All right, good. Let's jump back into our text. Give me a moment.
Jewish pirates.
Jewish pirates of the Caribbean. Yes, I love that. All right, let's do this. Boom. All right, back inside. We finished the conversation about tzara'at, and now we're up to Leviticus chapter 15. And this talks about, well, okay, it gets detailed. Lots of details over here about a discharge from a man that leads to uncleanliness. All right, Leviticus chapter 15. My understanding is that this is like an unhealthy discharge. Here we go. And the Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, if any man has a discharge from his flesh, his discharge is unclean. And this shall be the nature of his uncleanliness due to his discharge. If his flesh runs with his discharge, or if his flesh is plugged up by his discharge, that is his uncleanliness. Any bedding upon which the man with the discharge will lie shall become unclean. Any object upon which he will sit shall become unclean. And a man who touches his bedding shall immerse his garments and immerse himself in water, and he remain unclean. He will or shall remain unclean until evening. And anyone who sits on an object upon which the man with the discharge will sit, so he sits on something and then someone else sits on it, so the second guy shall immerse his garments and immerse himself in water, the mikvah, and he shall remain unclean until evening. And anyone who touches the flesh of the man with the discharge shall immerse his garments and immerse himself in water, and he shall remain unclean until evening. And if the man with the discharge spits upon a clean person, now that's not recommended. We shouldn't be spitting on anybody. But if that happens, that person, the second person, shall immerse his garments and immerse himself in water, and he shall remain unclean until evening. Any riding gear upon which the man with the discharge will ride will become unclean. So if this guy's riding a horse with a saddle, boom. And whoever touches anything that will be under him becomes unclean until evening. And whoever lifts them up shall immerse his garments and immerse himself in water, and he shall remain unclean until evening. And whomever the man with the discharge touches, without the latter having rinsed his hands, shall immerse his garments and immerse himself in the waters, and he shall remain unclean until evening. And the earthenware vessel, which the man with the discharge will touch, shall be broken, because, as you know, we cannot kosher earthenware vessels. And any wooden vessel, however, shall be rinsed with water, that can be kosher. When the man with the discharge is cleansed of his discharge, he shall count 7 days for himself for his purification, and then immerse his garments and immerse his flesh in spring water, and he shall be clean. And on the 8th day, he shall take for himself 2 turtle doves or 2 young doves, and come before the Lord to the entrance of the tent of meeting, and give them to the Kohen. And the Kohen shall make them one into a sin offering and one into a burnt offering, and the Kohen shall effect atonement for him for his discharge before the Lord. All right, so this is it. This is the law of the man with the discharge. And there's a whole procedure about impurity and uncleanliness, which again relates specifically or primarily to temple times, when uncleanliness was pertinent to the temple, to being able to go to the Temple Mount and going to the temple, etc., and eating of certain foods that had to be eaten in a state of purity. So this was the ritual that was done then. There is a source that says, one of these verses that indicates that he does the procedure in a bit of a discreet way. And the idea is that certainly this is a personal, matter for a person. So it's done in a discreet way with the Kohen. All right, we move on. Okay. Just see where we're at with this. All right, and we have a similar idea. We'll see, Torah is very egalitarian here with the genders. So we continue with discussion about men, and then we get a discussion about women. All right, here we go. Leviticus chapter 15, verse 16. This is the 7th reading. This is the final reading for today. And I don't know that I have much insight on this. These are laws, and we'll come up with some insight and some call to action, if you will, or some spiritual message at the end. But we're going to go through these verses. These are laws of purification rites for these situations. All right, here we go. A man from whom there is a discharge of semen shall immerse all his flesh in water. He shall remain unclean until evening, essentially unclean for that day until he goes to mikvah. And any garment or any leather object which has semen on it shall be immersed in water and shall remain unclean until evening. Any woman with whom a man cohabits, whereby there was a discharge of semen, they shall immerse in water, and they shall remain unclean until evening. All right. If a woman has a discharge, her flesh discharging blood, she shall remain in her state of menstrual separation for 7 days, and whoever touches her shall become unclean until evening. Again, we talked about a man, and now we talk about a woman. And whoever she lies on, and whatever she lies on during her menstrual separation, she shall become unclean. Whatever she sits on shall become unclean. And anyone who touches her bedding shall immerse his garments and immerse himself in water. He shall remain unclean until evening. Again, paralleled with what we said previously with regard to the man and his discharge, the same is true regarding the woman as well. And anyone who touches any object upon which he will sit shall immerse his garments and immerse himself in water, and he shall remain unclean until evening. And if he is on the bedding or on the object upon which he is sitting, when he touches it, he becomes unclean until evening. If a man cohabits with her, the uncleanliness of her menstruation shall be upon him, and he shall be unclean for 7 days, and any bedding he lies upon shall become unclean. And a woman whose flow of blood flows for many days outside the time of her menstrual separation, or she has a discharge after menstrual separation, then all the days she has her unclean discharge, she shall be unclean, just like the days of her menstrual separation, which basically indicates that whether the flow of blood is in its normal time or not, it still renders one in a state of impurity. Any bedding upon which she lies during all the time of her discharge will have the same uncleanness for her as the bedding of her menstruation. And any object upon which she will sit shall become unclean, like her menstrual uncleanness. And anyone who touches them shall become unclean. He shall immerse his garments and immerse himself in water, and he shall remain unclean until evening. And if she becomes clean of her discharge, she shall count for herself 7 days, and after this she may be cleansed. And on the 8th day, she shall take for herself 2 turtle doves or 2 young doves and bring them to the Kohen to the entrance of the tent of meeting. Again, the same ritual that the man with his discharge had to do. So again, very parallel, egalitarian laws for the man and for the woman with regards to these types of discharges. Now, I'll get to what I wanted to say in a moment. Let me just finish off with these few verses. And the Kohen shall make one into a sin offering and one into a burnt offering, and the Kohen shall effect atonement for her before the Lord from the uncleanliness of her discharge. And you shall separate. Okay, so that's kind of the end of the laws. And here's the summary, if you will. And you shall separate the children of Israel from their uncleanliness, so that they will not die on account of their uncleanness. That means that they should not separate, and not die means that one who is in a state of uncleanliness should not go to the temple, because going to the temple in a state of uncleanliness is liable for spiritual, it could end up not well if somebody enters the temple in an unclean state. You have to go to mikvah and take care of it beforehand and only then go. I'm sorry, I should have just finished the verse. It's clear here. You shall separate, I'll start again. You shall separate the children of Israel from their uncleanliness, so that they will not die on account of their uncleanliness if they defile my sanctuary, which is in their midst. In other words, if one goes to God's sanctuary in a state of tumah, of impurity, that's a problem. All right, this is the law for one who has a discharge and one from whom semen issues, through which he becomes unclean. And for a woman who has her menstrual flow, and for one who has a discharge, whether male or female, and a man who cohabits with an unclean woman. These are the laws regarding all of that. So, in short, these are the laws of ritual purity and impurity as they pertain, if we want to summarize the whole week, as they pertain to childbirth, as they pertain to tzarat, breakout, and as they pertain to various discharges from both genders. One thing to emphasize, and this is what I wanted to come around full circle to a few moments ago, but I wanted to just finish off the portion, is what I said at the beginning on Monday morning, and that the beginning of our discussion this week. And that is that the state of tumah, of what we translated here as uncleanliness, is not physically unclean. It's not a judgment either on any level, spiritual or physical. It's a state, it's a spiritual state that reflects a reality of some sort of absence of life. So whether it's a male with a discharge or a female with a discharge, right? If it's about a procreative type of discharge, so to speak, then it renders one in a state of impurity, either the man or the woman. And this state of impurity is is addressed by going to mikvah. This is why, now, there's two issues. One is with regards to intimacy, which this Torah portion did not deal with. In other Torah portions, it talks about the prohibitions of intimacy during that time. What this portion did speak about is the issue of tumah, of uncleanliness, of impurity, vis-a-vis going to the Temple Mount, going to the temple, hanging around pure areas. So that's where this conversation is. So vis-a-vis that point, nowadays we don't have a temple, therefore, essentially, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter if one is impure because you're not going to a temple anyway. There is no temple. There's no holy temple. Yet, nonetheless, men have the custom, many men have a custom of going to mikveh every day. If not every day, then Friday afternoon before Shabbat. If not Friday afternoon before Shabbat, then maybe once a month. If not once a month, then at least on the eve of Yom Kippur. It's actually an obligation for a man to go to mikveh at least once a year on the eve of Yom Kippur. It's a Hasidic custom, and others have adopted as well, to go every single day, every single morning. So that's point number one. But remember, there's another issue, which is the issue of intimacy. And our Torah portion mentioned about, lying with a woman, but it wasn't in the context of intimacy necessarily. It was just in context of closeness. The context of intimacy, there's another issue, which is when a woman is menstruating, so there is a prohibition. So there is, again, the impurity like there is for the man as well with the seminal discharge. But there's another level, which is called nida, which means that there's an additional prohibition of intimacy at that time until that time is finished and she goes to the mikvah. So that is, I would say, one of the only areas in which this is still relevant today in this regard. So that is the area in which this is relevant. It's the mikvah with regard to this mitzvah that I'm talking about right now, which is not the direct one of what we just read. We read about more the technicalities of it. I'm talking about the intimacy piece of it, which is discussed in other parts of Torah, which we'll get to at some point. But euphemistically, this topic of Jewish law is called family purity, just because that's a nice way of saying it. That doesn't necessarily get super detailed. So family purity, mikvah family purity, it means basically abstaining during certain times, and then mikvah, and then resuming the physical connection. There's so much written on this, and this was not the direct topic of this Torah reading that we did today, but it comes up. Certainly it's related to it, right? Because we talked about the state of impurity, but we didn't speak about the prohibitions against, the cautions against intimacy, but I can't not mention it. And mikveh is one of the most important mitzvot that we have. It's a beautiful mitzvah. It's been said, many have pointed out the renewing, I don't know if that's the right way to phrase it, but the rejuvenational, that's not a word, quality of this in a relationship, where when there is, almost mandated times of separation, that makes the times of connection that much more valued. And mikvah, the experience of mikvah night is almost like, a wedding night almost. It's like, a resuming of that part of the relationship. And it's really a beautiful thing. There are so many articles and books and essays and even, I'm sure, videos and lectures and who knows what on the topic of mikvah. We've had speakers that have spoken primarily to women's groups and whatever on the beauty of the mitzvah of mikvah. So there's I'm not going to be able to add much to the conversation, but just I wanted to mention in this context, and certainly the Rebbe was very much one of the 10 mitzvah campaigns that the Rebbe launched over the years was the campaign of awareness of how important this mitzvah is. It's important, of course, for a bride before her wedding, as well as, ideally, every month, when she's in a relationship that should happen. One other point to mention is, the value of the mitzvah and the spiritual boost that it gives to the family. There's a wonderful story. There's a Rabbi Gutnick. I think it happened with him. Rabbi Gutnick in Australia was, I think it was him, or Rabbi Groner. I think it was Rabbi Gutnick. Okay, I hope it was him. But either way, it's a great story. So he wanted to start doing like an adult education series, classes, whatever, and he was wondering what to do. And either he asked the Rebbe or the Rebbe had come out with this campaign. Either way, he decided to give a class or lecture series on mikvah, on family purity laws and, that sort of thing. And they advertise it and they put it out there and they have everything ready. And one woman shows up. And, he's like, now he can't, she's interested in learning, so he's not going to turn her away. So he teaches it, but it's kind of, it's one person and he feels bad that other people didn't show up. So he's all sorts of mixed emotions. And after it's done, he wrote a letter to the Rebbe saying, basically he did it and only one person showed up. And he's feeling, down about that. So the Rebbe wrote back to him. He's like, how many mothers did Moses have? It's like only one woman showed up. How many mothers did Moses have? One, right? One Jewish mother, one mother can have a Moses. So like, what do you mean only one showed up? Only one? You had a person there who studied, who hopefully was inspired about the laws of family purity and to bring that aura of holiness and spirituality into her home, to affect her family and her husband and her children, etc. So anyway, I only mentioned that because I love that story. And it's not about numbers. It's about because everyone is infinitely valuable. So it's never just one, but also about the power of this mitzvah and studying about this mitzvah. We have not historically at IJA, we have not done a tremendous amount on mikvah. We've talked about it, but we've never done like a sustained, like multiple session series on it. I don't believe. It was actually a plan of mine, either a year or a year and a half ago, or 2 years ago. Maybe at this point, it's almost coming up on 2 years, to do a mikvah crawl. Did I ever put that out in advertising, or did I just speak about it? Does anybody remember that? Okay. We were going to do an afternoon, a Sunday afternoon, where we would gather in, location number one. And, one of the local shluchos, maybe Miriam Lipsker, Mrs. Lipsker over at Emory. So she does a lot of lecturing on mikvah, really across the world. She speaks at like mikvah openings around the country and around the world, and she's actually flown out to speak. She's really a tremendous speaker on this topic and other topics as well. So the plan was to have her come out. We would do this obviously locally. She would come out to location A and speak about mikvah. And we would do it at one of the local mikvahs. And then it would be like a mikvah tour, like check out and see it, because mikvahs today are beautiful. Back in the day, they were just simple, but today, they're like spas. So, check out the mikvah, have some food and whatever, just kind of like become familiar with like what mikvah is and everything. And then do like a tour of like 3 or 4 mikvahot. And everyone, we drive to the next location and have like another insight and some more food. And then, kind of like have an afternoon. I was going to call it the mikvah crawl. I don't think we ever did it. I know we never did it. I don't think I even put it out there. It's just like I was going to do it at a certain time and the timing didn't work out. And then kind of the idea got pushed off. But this might be...
You did advertise it.
We did advertise it.
And we didn't do it because of COVID, or I forget.
I don't remember. Maybe there wasn't, maybe I didn't push it enough, or we didn't have enough of a response, or maybe the date didn't end up working. So we pulled the date and we never rescheduled it. I don't remember exactly what it was.
I don't recall anything. I don't.
It was at the beginning. I want to say it was going to be after high holidays. Maybe not this past year, like the year before. I don't know. It's, who can remember nowadays, but it might be worthwhile to get something back on the old radar. So anyway, that's it. So that concludes today's Torah portion. It's interesting because last week, Shmini, we spoke about laws of purity and impurity regarding animals. And now we talked about humans. Today, this week, we talked about humans. We talked about kosher, unkosher animals, clean, unclean. So this week we talked about kosher and unkosher, not really unkosher, but like ritual purity, ritual impurity regarding humans, and it follows the pattern of creation, right? First animals were created, then human beings. So first we talk about the laws of the animals, then we talk about the laws of human beings. When we feed our families, we first feed the animals and then we feed the human beings. So there's this beautiful precedence of animals first, which reminds us to have sensitivity to all of God's creatures. And as we treat our animals, so we end up treating ourselves. That's really it. You want to see how somebody will treat somebody else, look at how they take care of animals. If they're, a little bit rough around the edges, that is always a sign of, a negative sign up ahead. Anyway, so in conclusion, this week we learned about the laws of purity and impurity regarding various scenarios. The major piece was the state of tzarat, which renders one impure and one has to be purified. But in the larger context, it was really about pure and impure. Life and the absence of life, whether a huge absence of life or even a subtle absence of life. Judaism Torah reminds us to be very careful to pay attention to life and any variations thereof. We're meant to celebrate life. We honor death and memorialize those who have passed on, but we don't glorify death. We honor death. We don't glorify death. We glorify life. Indeed, may we bring Hashem's glory into our life and utilize every moment that we have to bring more light into the world. Thank you very much for joining me this week. Shabbat Shalom, and see you all tonight at Shabbat Under the Stars in a few hours. All right. See you soon.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
See you
Shabbat
tonight.
Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Bye.